June 4th, 1943. Railroad Street, Mexia, Texas. The pencil trembled slightly as it moved across the secret diary of Uniffizier Vera Burkhardt. Every single word she wrote was the kind of sentence that, if discovered by her officers, would be enough to land her in solitary confinement. "They must be lying to us," she wrote. "The Americans must be deceiving us." No nation fighting a war on two fronts could possibly live in such abundance. What she saw through the train window shattered 3 years of Nazi propaganda in an instant. In every farmhouse, at every street corner, in every shop, electric lights were blazing. It was 10 p.m., yet the Texas plains glowed like an endless constellation of electric stars stretching to the horizon. Back in Germany, blackout regulations introduced in 1940 had plunged the country into darkness. Even before the war, only about 20% of German farms had electricity. But here, in the place Nazi propaganda had described as decadent, rotten America, electricity flowed like running water. From Erwin Rommel's Afrika Korps, 1,850 battle-hardened veterans stepped off the train. Yes, off a passenger train. Not livestock cars, not freight wagons, but Pullman coaches with cushioned seats, dining cars, and sleeping compartments. The entire town of Mexia had gathered to watch their arrival. None of them knew that this moment would trigger one of the deepest psychological shifts in modern political history. The systematic collapse of Nazi ideology under the naked weight of American industrial power. The equation of Allied victory would no longer be written in battle plans, but in production figures. And those numbers would tear apart everything these soldiers believed about their enemies, their own nation, and the cause for which they fought. The beginning of the collapse. Tunisia, May 13th, 1943. After taking over from Rommel, General Jürgen von Arnim surrendered with roughly 250,000 to 275,000 German and Italian troops under his command. The figures vary because scattered units kept surrendering for days. The most seasoned desert fighters, men who had driven the British back to Egypt and earned even Montgomery's respect, were now prisoners of war. Among them was Hauptmann Friedrich Radke. He wore the first-class Iron Cross, was a veteran of the French campaign, and had been wounded twice in North Africa. His diary, later discovered in the National Archives decades after the war, became the most detailed record of the psychological impact of American captivity on German soldiers. Port of Oran, Algeria. The first cracks. Radke and some 30,000 other prisoners waited in temporary cages around Oran for the transport ships that would carry them across the Atlantic. There, the first blows of American efficiency began to fracture their convictions. The U.S. Army processed thousands of POWs per day, with a level of organization that even the Wehrmacht at its peak had never approached. Identity cards were photographed and filed, medical examinations were carried out, vaccinations were given, their Geneva Convention rights were explained by American officers who spoke fluent German. But the first real shock came with the food. Obergrenadier Hans Müller of the 21st Panzer Division, who would write to his mother 8 months later, recalled, "While we were penned up in the cages at Oran waiting for the ships, the Americans fed us better than we had eaten in the last 6 months of desert warfare. White bread, real coffee, meat twice a day. At first we thought it was propaganda. We said to each other, They're trying to win us over." It turned out this was just their standard military ration. Liberty ships, giants of industry. The Liberty ships that took them across the Atlantic were themselves monuments to the miracle of American production. The SS Robert E. Peary had been built at the Kaiser shipyards in California in 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes. Had the German soldiers heard this at the time, they would have dismissed it as absurd propaganda. At the height of the war, the same type of ship was being produced at a pace of 3 per day. To avoid sailing empty on the return trip, each convoy carried around 30,000 prisoners back to America every month. Crossing the Atlantic, overwhelming abundance. Feldwebel Kurt Zimmermann of the 90th Light Division kept a diary during the 2-week Atlantic crossing. His observation was simple, but devastating. The crew of the ship threw away more food each day than our company was issued in a week. Half-eaten steaks, entire loaves of bread, milk poured out, not because it had spoiled, but because there was too much of it. They weren't doing this to humiliate us. To them, it meant nothing. Their resources seemed endless. From the American guards, they learned that this huge vessel was just one of 2,710 Liberty ships. Its engines were built in 3 different factories. Its parts came from 32 states. Prussian aristocrat Lieutenant Colonel Wilhelm von Stobern, spotting the radar antenna, wrote, "We believed this technology existed only in limited quantities for us, and perhaps for the British. Yet here it was, even on this one merchant ship." That was the first moment I truly began to doubt that Germany could still win the war. August 2nd, 1943. Norfolk Naval Base, Virginia. The first glimpse of America destroyed every myth Nazi propaganda had spun. 4,300 acres of docks and infrastructure, piers stretching for miles, dozens of ships loading and unloading at the same time. This single port processed more cargo in 1 day than Hamburg could in an entire week. As the POWs were marched toward the trains, they passed parking lots full of cars driven by dock workers. In Germany, car ownership was still largely limited to the wealthy and party elites. Here, ordinary longshoremen drove their own cars to work. But the greatest shock of all was the trains, not freight wagons. Not the German war cars meant for 40 men or 8 horses, but full passenger trains. Pullman coaches with upholstered seats, sleeping compartments, dining cars with white tablecloths, observation cars with wide windows. Hauptmann Radke wrote, "We boarded like tourists. The American guards even apologized because the air conditioning in our car wasn't working properly. Air conditioning in August. We had believed that such a thing existed only on Hitler's personal train." As the Pullman trains headed south into Texas, the prisoners were looking, for the first time, at a world untouched by the front lines. All along the way, bright electric lights reached up into the night sky, not just in big cities, but in isolated farmhouses, tiny towns, little roadside stations. Everything was lit. Unteroffizier Franz Keller wrote in his diary, "America never seems to go dark. We thought it was a ridiculous waste of energy, until they told us that even in peacetime, Germany could never have produced this much electricity." With every new landscape, the prisoners arrived at the same conclusion. America was richer than Germans could have imagined, and it could maintain that prosperity in the midst of total war. Mexia, Texas, June 4th, 1943. As the train pulled into Mexia, townspeople lined both sides of the platform. Children ran around waving little flags. Women held parasols against the sun. Farmers parked their tractors off to one side to watch. The curious eyes watching the train had no idea about the psychological collapse happening inside those cars. But the prisoners all realized the same thing at almost the same moment. These people did not seem to carry the hatred that war had taught them to expect. On the contrary, what they saw was curiosity, sympathy, even hospitality. "We were bracing ourselves to be pelted with stones," wrote Gefreiter Otto Lang. "They waved at us instead." For most of them, this was the first time they had seen Americans up close. No one was shouting. No one was spitting. No one was threatening them. The enemy that war had turned into a demon suddenly resolved into ordinary human beings. Camp Mexia, America's agricultural miracle. The POW camp at Mexia revealed a great deal about the United States of that era: abundance, order, efficiency. Most of the barracks were not wooden shacks, but prefabricated metal structures. Every barrack had electric lighting. Cold running water was always available. The laundry facilities alone would have seemed revolutionary to most Germans. At that time, many German households still didn't have a washing machine at all. Meals were served regularly, and American officers were meticulous about following international regulations. Oberleutnant Werner Kausch wrote, "We assumed they would starve us. Here, they give us the same rations they give American farm workers. We get meat twice a day. Even before the war, that would have been a luxury in Germany." Inside the camp, the small store and canteen created a mental shock of their own. For the first time, German soldiers saw 8 different brands of soap lined up on a single shelf, 3 kinds of chocolate, dozens of packaged food products, bottled milk chilled in refrigerators. It was the exact opposite of the Nazi narrative of a decayed, impoverished America. The break. A German soldier's doubt about his own country. Hauptmann Radke recorded a single thought that changed everything. "For the first time, one sentence crossed my mind. If this is our enemy, then who exactly are we fighting for?" Many soldiers wrote openly that the level of prosperity they saw here would be impossible in Germany. Even when their letters home were censored, the admiration leaked through between the lines. One diary entry put it bluntly, "The Americans cannot be compared to us when it comes to production. That is why we lost the war, not because of our soldiers, but because of their factories." Political impact. The quiet collapse of Nazism. Of the roughly 380,000 German soldiers held in POW camps in the United States, the majority returned home no longer. Nazis? The reason was not propaganda. It was not coercion. It was not forced re-education. The reason was what they had seen with their own eyes: a free press, massive industrial output, a high standard of living, a powerful economy, social diversity, the comfort of civilian life. All of this showed that the supposedly superior German order promised by Nazism was, in reality, more primitive and far less effective. One of the biggest factors easing Germany's transition to democracy after the war was precisely these returning soldiers, telling their families and communities what they had witnessed. Chapter: The First Days in America. After the first weeks in the Mexia camp, the German prisoners could no longer deny a simple truth. Even the small slice of America they saw was enough to win the war. Camp officials offered voluntary work assignments on farms and in lumber operations for those who wanted them. These jobs kept the Germans busy while providing labor for the Americans. The prisoners were even paid a small wage. This completely contradicted the German propaganda that claimed a captured soldier loses his honor. Many wrote that working again made them feel human. Unteroffizier Karl Brenner put it this way: "We assumed they would treat us like slaves. Instead, they gave us wages." American farms, devastating comparisons. Those who went out to work on local farms were stunned by what they saw. Mechanical harvesters, automated irrigation systems, a sea of tractors, electricity on every farm, vast storage barns, and massive grain silos. In Germany, most farms still depended on horses and manual labor. In America, a single farmer, with his machinery, could produce more than 3 German farmers combined, Lieutenant Dieter Vogt wrote in his diary. America has the productive power to earn its victory. We are selling ideology. They are dealing in reality. Relations with American guards. Most prisoners were astonished by the way American guards treated them. They were not shouted at, abused, or constantly threatened. Instead, the guards often talked with them, joked with them, even offered them cigarettes. One German officer remarked, "They treat us as human beings. Our own government did not treat even its own people this way." The camp organized regular sports events, swimming days, a library, and movie nights. Hollywood films were shown frequently, and music was provided. One German soldier asked himself, "Why would an enemy nation show films to its prisoners?" It took us a long time to understand. For them, this was simply normal. America's real power. The production miracle. What impressed most POWs more than anything else was America's seemingly limitless capacity to produce posters and newspapers available in the camp's openly listed U.S. war production figures. 20,000 aircraft per month, 100,000 tanks and armored vehicles per year, 60 ships per month, millions of rifles, guns, and shells. One prisoner wrote, "When we saw these numbers, we understood that the war was already over. We just hadn't stopped dying yet." American diversity, propaganda falls apart. Nazi propaganda had painted America as degenerate, directionless, overrun by foreigners. But the German POWs simply had to look around at the people working in and around the camps to see something very different. Irish Americans, Italian Americans, African Americans, Jewish Americans, Mexican Americans, all working together, eating together, joking together. Oberfeldwebel Heinrich Albrecht wrote, "We were raised on racial theories. What we saw here was, in a single phrase, shocking. Different peoples, one nation." The deepest fracture. When German officers finally understood. Many German officers noticed how well-educated Americans seemed to be. Most of the guards were high school graduates. Some had attended university. Almost every officer assigned to the camps could speak German. Some American clerks even corrected the German in POW letters or helped translate them. For Nazi officers, this was especially unsettling. Major Wilhelm Meyer wrote, "We believed ourselves to be a chosen nation. Yet every American we met seemed better educated, better fed, more relaxed, and more self-assured than we were. Working in an American town, everyday life up close. Some prisoners were temporarily sent outside the camp to work in nearby towns. There, whatever remained of Nazi propaganda's illusions finally collapsed. What they saw was this: a refrigerator in every home, a radio in every living room, a car in many driveways, thick, colorful newspapers, large grocery stores, an astonishing variety of food. In Germany, even a senior officer's salary could not have purchased such a lifestyle. One POW summed it up: "The American public lives better than our officers." Winning this war was never truly possible. War's end. Prisoners returning to Germany. When the war finally ended in 1945, hundreds of thousands of German POWs slowly made their way back home. What they found was cities in ruins, hunger everywhere, darkness, desperation. Compared with their memories of American prosperity, order, and freedom, most of them now accepted that Nazism had been a lie. Many historians argue that one of the most important forces behind Germany's post-war democratization was the testimony of these returning soldiers. The country we had been taught to hate was, in fact, the future we had never even been allowed to imagine. Conclusion: the silent collapse of an ideology. During their years of captivity in America, hundreds of thousands of German soldiers came to understand that Nazism was built on lies. America's strength flowed from freedom. Prosperity came from production, not doctrine. Racism was doomed to fail. The war had never truly been about what they were told. And the real reason Germany lost was not a lack of courage, but a lack of capacity. This war was not won only on the battlefield. It was won in the mind, through what people saw with their own eyes. America's lights, its machines, and its freedom quietly extinguished the dark mythology of Nazism.